Good evening, friends and neighbors of Waycross, Georgia, and those of surrounding counties, and all of you who might be on the internet that has been following along with this little program I've been displaying about the timeline of the Bible. Thank you and welcome. I want to get right into it today. I'm trying a little different format, working from my home as I found a new toy that I was introduced into. So I want to try to show that to us here this evening to do our little plan on rather than drawing on the board. I may go back to that, but for right now, let's try this on this time. I'm going to go into screen share and pull up a whiteboard, basically, same thing, same idea I've been working with, but a little bit different thing. As we know, we have been talking about the Bible, the divisions of the Bible, and we had the Old Testament, and we had, let me get my little highlighter going on here. We had the Old Testament, and we had the New Testament right here. We said those two things could be divided into three sections, which is the patriarchal, where the fathers ruled at, and then we had at Mount Sinai, then Moses got the law from God. And there, that period, and I kind of shrunk this down so we could do this down here because this is such a broad area. From there, we went into the Mosaic period or Mosaic law, and then now we're in the Christian age. Now, on this timeline that we're looking at, which is a man-made timeline to divide the Bible up so we can understand whenever periods of time or events happen. If you learn those 16 divisions, then when somebody mentions Joseph in Egypt, you'll know they're in the patriarchic age. Or if they mention wilderness wandering, you'll know they're after Moses received the law, 10 commandments on the mountain of God in Mount Sinai, and so forth. And that's the idea behind this, is to kind of give us an idea of the history of the scriptures, which was written by 40 men over 1,500 years. So let's begin with, this is number 4 is where we are today, because we've done a whole picture. Then we done before the flood, then we done after the flood. And if you will go back to those videos and look at that, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Today we come into the third period, which we're going to call patriarchal again. And that's going to be, we had this here whole section from the 0 up to Mount Sinai. I call that because the fathers ruled at that time. But here's a more definite drawn out of the more prominent characters from the Bible of after the flood. And our first one here that we're going to see here, this is going to be Abraham, father of faith, as we see right here. And Abraham was one that God made the promise to, that through him that all nations would be blessed, and through him the Savior would come, and those kind of things. And so in this, that we find there that God told him, made all these promises to him. And we find that Abraham was one, him and his wife Sarah were barren and did not have any children and could not have any children. And they got way past their age of giving birth. And so God still promised him, you're going to have a child. And so from that, they thinking that, okay, we got to have us another person involved. So they got the handmaid involved. God said, no, that wasn't the one I had intended. I'm going to tell you. And he visited them one day in the plains and said, this time next year, Sarah's going to have a child, which meant also, of course, Abraham and her had to do a little bit involvement together. But this is where we was the child of promise. And this was going to be the child of Isaac. Here's who we're talking about today. And so Isaac was then born after Ishmael was born. And here we have Isaac down here. And Isaac was a son of promise, as we find spoken of in the New Testament as well. And this section goes on. Isaac had a time where there was no real war. He had one little issue with a king over a well and some group of people, but he had a pretty peaceful life. Now, from Isaac, whenever Isaac started to get old, then he had 2 sons, and he had married a very wonderful woman that we know as the one who favored Esau. Can't remember her name right now. I want to say Rebecca. That escapes me right at the moment. So anyway, here we have Isaac and Rebecca got married, and they had 2 sons, and they was named Jacob and Esau. And we know that Jacob, being one, that he was one who tricked Esau, and he done that because Esau didn't see no value in it anyway. Esau gave away his birthright for a bowl of soup, if you will. Okay, Esau was a hunter, Jacob was a keeper of sheep. After that happened, then he also went into his father with his mother's help and made him think he was Esau, because the firstborn was supposed to get the better blessings. And so therefore this is they went in before the father with his arms covered with sheep's wool and so forth, and tricked him into giving them the blessings, him the blessing of the firstborn. And so then Jacob ended up having all the blessings from his father, and he had nothing left to give to Esau. Well, this made Esau mad. So Esau wanted to kill Jacob. And he was going to wait till the father died, and he was going to do it after that. Well, Jacob and the mother got together, said, you need to leave here and go out and see my brother Laban. So Jacob takes off, and then he goes over to see Laban. And just in between this time periods when you find he has a dream of the angels ascending up and down on a ladder, going back and forth, which is the story of Jacob's ladder. Anyway, he gets out here, and he sees a woman he wants to marry. So he works for this man for 7 years, Laban, and Laban tricks him and gives him the oldest daughter first for a wife, and then tells him, you know, in our country here, the oldest has to marry first. And so then Jacob at that point then had to work another 7 years to get the wife he wanted to have. And so here, in between all this here, then these two daughters, which was married to the same man, started to have a small war or contest, if you will, between them of who can have the most children. They even get their handmaidens involved, and they end up with 12 sons and 1 daughter. They leave the land after a long time being out there and head back over to the land of promise in Canaan where he was at. And he meets Esau. Everything becomes okay as they meet Esau. And then, of course, the story goes on that these children then grow up. And then Joseph is one of the youngest of his favorite wife, who has 2, which is Joseph and Benjamin, Benjamin being the very youngest person. But anyway, he had a dream that all of his siblings were going to bow down to him, and he was going to be over them all. And so they didn't like that, said, what is this dreamer? Who does he think he is? And so they took him and they sold him to a Ishmaelite caravan, who then took Joseph and sold him as a slave in Egypt. In Egypt, and you need to go read the story, but I'm just getting the highlights here. In Egypt, Joseph becomes second in command. A great famine comes upon the land. The brothers out here have to go to Egypt to buy grain. Joseph recognizes who they are. They don't recognize him. And the story goes, he finally gets them in a room by themselves after 2 or 3 trips before them thinking he's mad at them. And anyway, he finally reveals himself and tells them, go bring his father to Egypt. And they bring the father to Egypt. Then Jacob then dies. Jacob then dies. And the brothers think Joseph is going to do bad to them. He promises them that he's not going to do that, and which he does not. And so at that point now they're living in the land of Goshen in Egypt, and they're there. And they begin to do as God had told them in some other crew in the very beginning of time, which we've already been over, to be fruitful and multiply. And they did. And they became so big, so strong, that the Pharaoh said, this people has come so big over us, if we don't make them become our slaves, they will overtake us if they so desire. So they put them in bondage. And there they stayed in bondage for 400 years, fulfilling one of the promises that had been told to Abraham about his people. And then he said, then I will bring them out. That's where we'll pick up next time as we come into the wilderness wandering, because during this time also, we could go into the 10 plagues that are here, but we'll just talk about that next time right here as they begin to come out of the Egyptian bondage, because that is a beginning point, and then they come out of that and then we'll go back into that in a future reference. I hope this has helped you to understand a little bit more about the timeline that it goes on in the scriptures. And as you start to put these together, you'll be able to see how the story progresses of where God's people came from and what we are headed, where they are headed. And you'll find later on how some of them disappear because of disobedience, or the Savior comes in line, and it will just start to make a whole lot of sense if you follow along. So my friends, if you found this useful and valuable, then put a comment on a page below, and also share it with some of your friends, some of those people that you think might enjoy this and get some great value out of it as well. Thank you for stopping in, and we'll see you in the next video. Have a good day.